I've made it no secret that I really enjoy talking about game narrative. I mean, look at me, did you think I'd be talking about level design or system structures? But this admiration for narrative stems from it being what pushes me to complete most games I play, whether they be as simple as go kill Dracula in World War II or go be a Russian nun. Without these narrative hooks herding me like the sheep I am with the promise of character growth and a satisfying conclusion, I doubt I would finish some games. A game with a strong narrative gives my actions the context they need to feel meaningful and important, whether they directly relate back through the story's progression or not. But I will concede that most people are not like me, and that's good. To most people, narrative can often be seen as an afterthought or a flourish on top of something that functions already as a game on its own. This is where the term narrative-driven comes from. Narrative-driven, narrative-focused, story-rich, whatever phrase you believe in, is a way to separate games under the explanation that narrative will be a driving force to get you to complete the experience. Having a fleshed-out, well-crafted world with characters that grow and matter beyond just giving you the quest or helping you directly in gameplay, with the assumed opposite of this term then being gameplay-driven. A game that through its mechanics and system provides the player with an increasing challenge with new ways of progression and yada yada yada. Basically think of any game and you'll most likely land on one that isn't narrative-driven. Now, to be honest, I don't like these words. I don't like this one more, but to me, all these boil down to when in discussion is this one has cutscenes and this one has fewer cutscenes. And at worst, it can be offensive to the gameplay these games do feature and how effective it can be at conveying the narrative or just being fun in and of itself. So what do we do about this? Well, for starters, we need to stop this mentality that narrative is some binary switch and it's either on or off for games and accept that 99% of games do have a story. Sorry, Ian Bogost. What I want to discuss today, then, is a game that presents itself as having gameplay entirely disconnected from its story, but indirectly brings the two closer than I've ever seen before. A game so focused on using its gameplay to directly communicate what it refuses to acknowledge in its story. A game that explores how to find your own path. Who am I kidding? It's in the thumbnail. We're talking about Godhand. Let's move on. Godhand is a bizarre game, and I do not use that term lightly. Godhand is weird, old, frustrating, borderline offensive, and so unique that any comparison would be a disservice to the game. The game itself was developed by Clover Studios, a subdivision of Capcom responsible for some of the company's most experimental and weird titles, which is why they only got like 4 games before being shut down. Poised as a love letter to the beat-em-ups of yesteryear, Godhand was made the way its director Shinji Mikami wanted, not beholden to appealing to the sales charts and what they wanted, because what they wanted was more Resident Evil 4, and what Mikami wanted was Godhand. So who cares what it sells, let's make it. This is a good mentality to have when your game sells the worst out of any game from your studio and said studio shuts down a month later. Yeah, surprisingly, the genre that died off during the 6th generation of consoles because players were no longer interested led to the creation of a game within said genre that players weren't interested in. Now, this isn't to say that people didn't like Godhand, the game did well enough critically, but its mix of design players saw as outdated and released within the midst of the transition into the PS3 and Xbox 360, yeah, these numbers are making a lot more sense. Along with that, the game has been borderline forgotten by Capcom altogether. While the main character Gene was planned for Marvel vs. Capcom 3 as a way to remember the now gone Clover, he was replaced by Amaterasu from Okami, another Clover game, and to be honest, a much better pick for MVC. And if the thing you're most well known for after your game fails to sell is not being included in a fighting game, then your chances of relevancy are basically none. Though I will say Gene has made his way onto the Capcom side of my MVC wishlist, but aside from a re-release on the PS3 with the PS2 classics, Godhand is basically only playable with a PS2 copy, which is Jesus Christ! Yeah, there's basically no way to play this game now. And that stinks for any game, but especially for Godhand, which feels like such a weird snapshot of a time so far gone that it's essentially fossilized within this game. Something simultaneously outdated, yet so forward-thinking that it's unclear what the game even actually is. Godhand is best described as indecisive. Not in a bad way, mind you, but the game feels as though it's constantly dragging you in 12 different directions with no explanations for what's down each of them, all while making each path somehow fit into its overall theme of player agency and what it means in relation to a narrative. Now, despite me hyping up this game's story so much, I have no idea how I'm supposed to actually talk about it here. The main thing this game does so well is mystery. Or more specifically, not telling you anything. Barely anything is explained about this world and why it is the way it is, and if I were to go in the actual order in which each event plays out, nothing would make sense, so I'm just gonna go straight in. Long ago, an angel banished from the heavens fell to earth. Fueled by an unending rage, this being became the ancient god Angra. Just when all hope seemed lost for humanity, a man appeared with the powers of God sealed in his arms. Really? Not his hands? Anyways, with this ancient man containing anger for the time being, his arms were given the name Godhand, with them also being kept within a single clan in case of the demon's reawakening. And almost nothing I said is explained to you by the actual game. Yeah, aside from the clan, which we'll get back to later, everything involving anger and the origins of the Godhand comes from the manual. When you start the game, the only thing that is explained to you is the main character's name. And no, I did not misspeak and forget Olivia. Her name isn't even spoken till the second cutscene, and I'm getting too ahead of myself. Let's back up a bit. The game starts up with Jean, the man holding the right arm of the Godhand, and his companion Olivia arriving in some desolate wasteland for seemingly no reason. In reality, as explained later, Olivia is the only surviving member of the Godhand clan, which was attacked by whoever stole the Godhand's left arm. With Olivia on the run with the right arm, she gets herself into some trouble and is... I mean, she's technically saved by Jean. In a moment that happens off-screen, the Godhand supposedly bestows itself onto Jean in an attempt to save him, granting him its full power, with the two of them now on the quest to retrieve the second arm of the Godhand. And that's where Azel comes into play. Azel is the one who stole the left Godhand once he had gotten closer to the clan that held it under the disguise of being married to Olivia. The reveal that he is not your Angel and is actually your devil is what caused Olivia to run away with the Godhand in the first place in an attempt to keep it safe. So what is Azel's great big plan now that he has the powers of a god? Well, it's to say that gods are lame, and he's actually a demon with the devil hand. Which, like, okay buddy, just put the fries in the bag. With this demon power, he joins the 4 davas, a group of demons with the goal of destroying and rebuilding the world in their image. The group is comprised of 4 members: Azel himself, the ever-hungry, borderline offensive Elvis, the horny and horny Shannon, and the big bad himself, Belze. Now this may seem like a lot of information for the beginning, but to be fair, much of it is sprinkled throughout the game in between the levels, and in general a lot of the story boils down to Jean went there, and then went back. Jean went there, and then went back. The real meat of the story comes from the character interactions that cause these back and forths to happen and the boss fights, which, my god, thank goodness we're not going to talk about the boss fights. But as Jean bounces from place to place either at Olivia's command or out of his own concern, the fun stops once Olivia has been kidnapped. She's brought to the top of Angra Tower for one final attempt at resurrecting the ancient god, which obviously fails because someone didn't account for the fact that Jean is cooler. After defeating Azel, his body becomes too weak, and the ancient Angra sitting within him reawakens. In desperation, Azel throws away his devil hand, with it landing in front of Jean. With both arms now attached to Jean, he defeats Angra the same way that mysterious man did all those years ago, with him and Olivia walking off into the sunset. Now, since the overall plot of the game is rather simple, a lot of what makes Godhand so special is the character interactions between levels, and all of them involve one spiky-haired loser the game describes as Dusty, the wielder of the right Godhand himself, Jean. Now, Jean is a total loser. He's a sexist moron with a weak sense of justice, having to be told or sometimes convinced by Olivia to do even the most basic of kindnesses. Everything about the way he acts screams self-conscious, choosing to insult everything he comes into contact with unless he punches it first. His progression throughout the game comes in 2 parts. First, the way he defines himself as a wielder of the Godhand, and second, the development of his sense of justice. Let's start with the latter first. Throughout the opening hours of Godhand, Jean doesn't really know who he is fighting or why he should even care, choosing to disregard the demons he faces or even tries to chicken his way out of actually fighting them. It takes mostly the words of Olivia to actually get him to fight and act since, well, he has the Godhand and can actually win. That is except for one moment in the beginning when he witnesses another man having his arm chopped off. The scene in question does feature Olivia telling Jean it's time to act, but unlike the rest of the moments where she orders him, Jean doesn't fight against it. He understands that people are going to be hurt if he doesn't step in and do something, and so he goes out to actually help. This is also the same justification he uses when Olivia was in danger, seeing that someone directly in front of him was going to be hurt, choosing to step in even if it obviously wasn't going to end well. To Jean, all that matters for him to get involved is someone right in front of him being hurt. Without that driving factor, he'd rather sit down and chill, which is why so many of the levels have to start with Olivia telling him directly that it is his duty to go out and act, even if he doesn't see anyone. This would also help explain in the gameplay his saving of the random humans who get caught up in the torture acts of the demons. These are moments where persuasion isn't needed because Jean can see someone going to be hurt and knows that it is time to help, and eventually, these persuasions and arguments for Jean to do something end, as he understands that he's the only one that can do what needs to be done. And this development into the savior of the land plays directly into how he defines himself as a wielder of the Godhand, which, I mean, we don't have to talk about right now, so let's go on to Olivia. Olivia comes from the Godhand clan as the last surviving member of it after Azel's little murder spree, and because of her history with this very important deadly weapon, her interest in Jean exclusively comes from the fact that he has the Godhand. Now what exactly do I mean by this? Well, like I said, a lot of the interactions with Jean and Olivia have her trying to get Jean to use the Godhand like the weapon it is and not just sit around on her butt all day. Olivia recognizes the world is in danger, whether it be from Azel or the demons running around, and sees the only way to stop them being Jean. And well, she kinda hates Jean. I've been trying my best to dance around it, but whenever I say she convinces or argues that Jean should do something, I more so mean threatens. She wants to chop Jean's arm off and give it to literally anyone else, anyone more capable and willing to do the actual job that needs to be done. And this is why I believe the Godhand had chosen Jean rather than Olivia giving him the arm after the attempt at saving her. Imagine if your culture's defining artifact was partially stolen and the remaining piece ended up attached to this dickhead. This loser who couldn't care less about what it actually means and probably thinks it'll make him better at blackjack. I would be mad too. But as she sees the way Jean changes and the acts of courage he takes as he learns what it means to be a god, she warms up to him. Not too much, but by the end of the game they both understand each other much better and become actual friends, rather than begrudged partners. And also because, she doesn't have anyone else to go to now. Her family is dead, her boyfriend killed them, and the thing she valued most is now attached to Jean. Whether she likes it or not, he's all she's got, so her warming up to Jean not only comes due to his maturity as a warrior, but as a way to break through this loneliness Olivia has found herself in. When on the pause screen, you can see photos of Olivia and what wacky misadventures she's getting herself into, and it's just sad. When Jean isn't around, all she does is sleep, read, sleep again, drink, maybe sleep. She has nothing really but the Godhand, or more specifically, Jean, waiting around all while he smacks around or spanks the four davas. Oh yeah, let's talk about them now. The four davas as a group are rather basic as villains. All of them have one idea or feeling they attach themselves to, with all their dialogue revolving around that feeling. It's greed, or more specifically food, for Elvis, pleasure, or more specifically torture, for Shannon, and the past, or more specifically Angra, for Belize. This is their goal throughout the game, to keep themselves and their forms of pleasure the same and consistent. If there's anything the davas don't like, it's change. And this is why they're so hostile to Azel for being the newest member and freak out when the second Godhand is found. They don't like things being different, and this feeling is exactly what they try to push onto their torture victims in an attempt to control them. Throughout the game, random civilians are being tortured by demons that populate each level. If Jean chooses to do so, he can save these people and be given a new punch or something. I don't know, I didn't bother checking. While these scenes of torture play into the evilness of the four davas of the group, the cutscenes that play after always perplexed me. Often after saving them, the humans would run off to who knows where, leaving the reward. But it's how they ran off that always caught me as interesting. Often they would escape while still within the same form of torture the demons put them in. After stomping out the fires preventing a man from exploding, that same man would run off with the pole still attached to him. After saving a man from drowning, he would swim off. This is the four davas' true intent with these acts of torture. It's an attempt to get the victims to be comfortable with this feeling they've stuck them in, making them conform to it. It's not simply putting these people in uncomfortable scenarios and making them squirm, it's about getting them to like it. This is why afterwards they still act in relation to how they were attacked. It's how their brain expects them to be viewed. That's why the man you saved in the mines shows his butt to Jean after being saved. That's how he's been perceived for the past however long he's been tortured. One of the girls you can rescue admits to enjoying the spankings the demons give her after being with them for so long. The main goal of the four davas is to reawaken Angra and rebuild the world in the image of the demons. So in an attempt to prepare the humans for said rebirth, they make them think like the demons. They make them act like the demons, make them conform and twist into being comfortable with the pain they now see as torture, but will later see as normal. An attempt to show that humans and demons are all one and the same, and that the other side just needs a little push. An idea that the final member of the four davas is fascinated with. Everyone, please welcome the reason Olivia lost everything she valued so dearly. The wielder of the left Godhand himself, the smooth-haired dickhead, whatever, Azel. Now on the surface, Azel appears to be the classic I'm you, but stronger character, which is easily one of my favorites, but in reality, he's someone with a flawed view of what it means to be human. We'll go back to it later, but the Godhand has the power to make you either a god or a demon, with the latter being what Azel wants to achieve. However, conventional wisdom then would lead to the assumption that there are three factions at play here: the demons, the gods, and the humans. But to Azel, there's only two: the demons and the gods. The humans are just just an extension of being demon. This would explain his reasons for joining the four davas in the first place. He's attempting to prove that he is a part of the demons not only through his powers of the Godhand, but with him still remaining human to the eyes of the other demons, while Jean is repeatedly referred to as God or even just the Godhand alone. This is why Azel sees them as polar opposites. While Jean marches ahead forging his own ideas of what it means to be a god, Azel will stay human to prove that demons and humans are one and the same. However, this idea is fundamentally flawed. Simply put, him and Jean are not opposites. They're different, don't get me wrong, but Jean is still human. Even if Azel wants to believe that humans are inherently connected to demons and that they're all one side of the same coin or whatever, being a god is not something definable. It doesn't take just having the Godhand to be a god, because Azel literally has the Godhand attached to him. Being a god is dependent on what it is you do. There's no set rulebook for you to act within when using the Godhand. It's how you feel you should act with it. And that's why I saved the second part of Jean's character arc for now. Jean's ability to define himself as a wielder of the Godhand is the most important aspect of him as a character, even more than his sense of justice. The Godhand is the thing that connects Jean to every other character in the game, but his use of it brings up a very important, undefinable question. What does the Godhand actually do? Godhand's combat is simultaneously really simple and really complicated. The game has 3 attack buttons with you being able to assign a plethora of moves to any of the buttons, with the main draw of the game coming from how all these moves interact with one another and how they allow for combos and sick juggles. Then there's the roulette wheel, which is essentially a super bar you build up by collecting weird cards dropped by enemies in boxes. Depending on the move, it will require a certain number of cards, allowing you to launch whatever move you pick. Then lastly, there's the tension gauge. When landing a long enough combo or picking up a girly mag, because Jean is a loser, you'll be able to use his arm will summon up the powers of the Godhand! Sorry, I couldn't help myself. When unleashing the Godhand, you'll basically be able to combo all of your moves back to back without any fear of being blocked in between you swinging. So to get back to my previous question, you may be saying, Noah, you just explained what the Godhand does. Why is this even a question? And that's because I explained what it does when playing Godhand. Okay, so ignore the gameplay. What does the Godhand actually do? Is there a cutscene where, say, the arm's powers are explained? Is there anything in the manual about it? The most you get is Azel slicing down some bosses in a final cutscene where Jean shoots some fireballs and I guess the song at the end, but throughout the game, the actual powers of the Godhand aren't really discussed. This is what I mean by presenting its gameplay as disconnected from its story, refusing to acknowledge how its main protagonist acts in the game. And that's weird. This isn't like, oh, they don't explain why Mario can jump. This is more like they don't explain what the Master Sword is. This is the main item of the game. It's the thing the villains are scared of. It's what Azel is constantly fighting to get. It's even the name of the game. And yet, the game never bothers to communicate directly what it does. So why have your main gameplay item, the thing everything revolves around, be so underexplored? And that's because it can do everything. Okay, well maybe not everything, but going back to the gameplay again, the main thing it works off of is customization. You can pick the moves Jean has on each attack button, each move slotted into the roulette wheel, and whether or not you even unleash the Godhand when your gauge is filled up. You have full control over how the Godhand works for you. If your Godhand is predicated on preemptive strikes meant to bait out and counter, then go ahead. If you're looking to use rapid fire strikes to break through enemies' guards and pummel them to refill your tension gauge, then that's what your Godhand does. Launchers, sweeps, lunging attacks, they're all a part of what it means to use the Godhand. Now I'd like to point out the difference in between how the Godhand is handled and how the demons and their ideas of torture and conformity are different, and it's how control is handled in both cases. You have full and final say in how the Godhand acts and works for you, and unlike the demons, the game is never getting you to stick to one thing, letting you find comfort in what you understand. It is encouraging you to try new moves, not only through how many are available, but with how difficult later enemies get, with them being easier to take down when you customize your moveset, though it is still your choice. And that's why the Godhand's abilities are never outright explained, because it can do so many different things that to say it does X would be a disservice to its ability to do Y or Q. And this is how the story of Jean becoming a god can actually function given the lack of explanation and direction of what being a god actually means. When you, the player, choose the Kung Fu Samba over the Ballbuster, you are making Jean into the god he has chosen. This is how he can define himself against the demons or Azel, by using the powers the way he wants to. And it's an idea that's simultaneously played out really well, but also a bit underdeveloped. The main issue I take with this concept is how silent the game is on Jean's path as a god. There's only a few lines talking about the decision directly, and while this does play into the story in the sense that Jean was still developing his own path as a wielder of the Godhand even without actually knowing he was, indirectly showing that he really is the chosen user, it also means it took a lot longer than I would have liked for him to acknowledge this, and I would have preferred just even a couple more lines where he recognizes he isn't like Azel or even the other demons. But, at the same point, this is easily one of the coolest implementations of player choice affecting a narrative I have ever seen. I have discussed in the past how games can disregard and ignore the player's free will in an attempt to heighten the character's actions, but this is the full-on opposite of that. The story only works because we are constantly directly influencing the actions of Jean and allowing him to define who he is as a user of the Godhand. The story cannot function without us, but at the same point, the onus of Jean's actions is not put on us. There's a common issue games face of acting as though the player's character is in some way indicative of the morality and ethics of the actual player. That our choice to gun down people is because we, the player, wanted to do it, rather than because we wanted to see how the game will respond to these actions through a character. And it can create characters that feel disconnected from the actual decisions being made in the story for the sake of some trolley problem-esque psychoanalysis of the player. In Ed Smith's blog titled "It Doesn't Matter When You Kill All the Civilians," he describes this exact frustration and how it can affect player experience. Quote, "When I choose to bomb all the civilians in Spec Ops: The Line, I'm doing it to advance the game and see what happens and how it's going to affect the characters. It's precisely the same to me as turning the page in a book. It has no moral aspects or essence. It's mechanical action. And when I see all the burned bodies, it matters to me in the sense of I'm following the plot and want to see what happens, but it doesn't matter to me morally, and I shouldn't be expected to give myself some kind of personal moral inspection. And I certainly shouldn't be expected to subject myself to someone else's moral inspection of me and then take that appraisal to heart, because I haven't done anything." Unquote. While we are actively controlling the character throughout a game's runtime, the narrative of that game never responds to you, because it doesn't know you. It knows the character you are playing as and the actions they chose to make within the context of the story. And while there exist games that try to emulate you through the choices they present, at the end of the day, it's still a character. Godhand, on the other hand, never acts as though you are the one making the choices, despite its combat and its themes of freedom and agency being only possible by you engaging with it. The game will always treat the choices in the combat as though they were the decisions of Jean, never letting you get involved directly in the story because you don't have the Godhand. Jean does. It's this really strange blend of player agency making the story, but not defining the story. The story is still Jean becoming a god through his own decisions and actions, but those actions and choices are made fully by you. But this doesn't mean that Jean is you. See what I mean about the story being weird? Though, this creates an even weirder question then. When does the story start? Now, I don't ask this question as some vain attempt at philosophy, but more so as an attempt to understand the game's own message. Jean's arc throughout the whole game is predicated on our interaction with the gameplay and the choices we make throughout it. But that's not how the game starts. The game begins with a cutscene and ends with one, but do these events transpire regardless of our interaction? Does Jean's arc of self-definition happen if we never pick up the controller? How about the opposite? Does the Godhand exist without the story, without the cutscenes that connect each level? Does it take strictly the context of Jean separating himself from the demons to make the Godhand a tool for self-definition? The work that got me to ask these questions was Stephen Beiren's blog, Suppose. The blog in question is more of a story than anything else, but the premise goes as follows. Say a man decided to film a street on a random day at a random time without looking at the street or even the film. When this man returns to collect the tape, unaware of its contents, what is within the tape? The common consensus would be that the tape in question holds a narrative, a series of events presented within, leaving the filmmaker with two options: throw it away and burn the tape, or give it to a random passerby. If the former is picked and the tape is never viewed, does that tape have a narrative? I find this question so fascinating on its own because I do love Beiren's work, but taking the question into account within the context of Godhand makes it even stranger. Because as we have established, Godhand's narrative is functional due to your actions. Does that same narrative play out if you never picked anything? If you, say, watched all the cutscenes on YouTube or just pummeled through the enemies without watching the very same cutscenes? There would be a narrative to follow, but would it be the same narrative as if you traditionally played the game? Now, I could just leave it as a dignified no and move on, but I want to look at why our interactions matter so much in a narrative and to what extent participation is required for a narrative to exist. Let me ask you this: why does art exist? You might hit me with the classic because someone wanted to make it and made it work in the vision of what they believed it should be, but I never liked that answer. Art exists for us. the viewers, the players, readers, whatever, so we can take something away from it. While the tape itself may have a narrative inside, it takes the participation of a viewer to actualize it in any meaningful way. Say you were on that street the same day it was filmed, watching the same moments, looking at everything that was shot. Would you have watched the tape? You may have seen every action taken on that street and heard every sound, but being there can never be the same as watching the tape, because the tape has something that being there in the moment doesn't: the presentation of the tape. This is how a narrative can start, by presenting something and inviting the viewer to engage with it. Watching the tape on the TV is one of the many ways the narrative of the street itself can be actualized and viewed, which is the main goal of a story, to be seen and for someone to take away something from it. If the person who was there watching the street the same day told you what had happened, would every detail be described with perfect accuracy? Could you know exactly how many steps the third man on that street took? Unless you're having the story regaled to you by memory man, most likely not. You would be experiencing a different narrative, not concerned with presenting itself in the same way as the tape would. So let's recap this and put this within the context of Godhand. Godhand is the street that got filmed. If Godhand was burned before anyone could play it, then no, it did not have a narrative because there was no one there to actualize it. For something to have a narrative, there must be a viewer, a participant, to make it into something by simply being there and thinking. This, however, can come in many parts. While the most common would be actually sitting down and watching the tape, playing the game in the traditional way we expect, there are other ways to have the story actualized, such as having the story told you by someone else there, say watching the cutscenes exclusively, or by just reading the manual and learning about the past of the world, which in the context of the street would be like reading an autobiography where the person the book is about found $1 on the street. All of these start the narrative of Godhand because it allows you to interact with the story within the game. So there isn't some set beginning for me to point at in terms of how the narrative works, because it's dependent on when you engage with it and begin to think and actualize that narrative. How that story will play out is dependent on you. I played the entirety of Godhand without actually reading the manual. I didn't even know it had any parts of the story to begin with. When I got to the final battle and Azel began talking about anger as though it was some common knowledge, I was so confused. I figured that if anything, it was a random weird boss like the game had done with every other boss before it. So for me, the story of Godhand didn't start within the pages of the manual. It began with Jean begging for water. I didn't experience the same narrative as people who read the manual. I played the game where my experience, my way of actualizing the narrative, didn't involve Angra. I wasn't scared of their resurrection, nor did I have any idea of what the Godhand clans were until they had appeared. Just like how someone watching the cutscenes won't know what the Godhand does, but will still see Jean in their own way. We are all engaging Godhand by experiencing it and seeing it in different ways, kinda like how Jean is actualizing the Godhand in whatever way he wants. At least that's the narrative I saw. But to back up to my flurry of questions from earlier, I had asked about the reverse of this scenario we had been discussing. Does the narrative of Godhand stay the same if you only play it? As we have continually established, a narrative starts when you engage with it in some way. An interaction is important to Godhand specifically because that's how Jean's arc can play out. What narrative is left if you remove the context that makes the Godhand important? And you know what? I'll just say it. You're left with a weaker narrative. Either way you slice it, removing the cutscenes takes away Jean's ideas as self-definition, and removing the gameplay takes away Jean's ability to actualize those same ideas. Both of these aspects are connected. They're linked together. There's no getting around it. They are worse off if you remove the other. And so now you can see why I hate this gosh dang phrase so much. Remember when this was the topic of the video, not Noah's philosophy party? I wouldn't for a second describe Godhand as narrative driven, nor would I even call it gameplay driven. Both of these aspects are too important to the experience of Godhand to place emphasis on one over the other because the other is worse, is less important. I don't even know how you could classify one of these in a way that disconnects it from the other without insulting it. While the gameplay is the main experience of Godhand, the narrative is what gives it the importance needed to function as an extension of its own themes. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. The narrative gives the Godhand this allure of a weapon that can allow you to become a demon or a god, while the gameplay shows how that actually happens, in turn creating a more defined and godlike Jean. This is why I wanted a new phrase, because people enjoy shorthand phrases they can point to instead of talking about what it is they actually think. I would call Godhand a game with a gameplay-driven narrative, a narrative that through its gameplay is able to function by relaying information not present in other aspects of its game. Now you may be saying, Noah, that's far too complicated for a term that's meant to be stuck onto a game as a signifier of what the experience entails. And You're right. I don't want to use either of these terms. I don't like having to separate narrative and gameplay in any way, but the pressure constantly feels pushed in that story and gameplay are two distinct aspects that need to be treated as separate. And while sure that is true in some cases, I don't see why it has to be the default. Godhand is a game that shows how being a god is not one set unified idea. It's a combination of everything you do, all the actions you take, and the choices that make Gene into the god he wants to be. Without the willingness to experiment and decide our own ideas, we fall into complacency, being okay with everything around us because it's what we understand. None of these moves matter more than the other, it's dependent on how you want to use them. You wouldn't say after a playthrough of never using the tension gauge that the game is sweep driven just because that's all you used. Why limit our discussions to phrases we can point to and slap on a Steam page as what defines the game? The Godhand isn't stuck to one thing, ignoring the others, so why should our discussions be? Sorry about that, I might have gotten a bit too heated there, which accounts for something, I guess. I talk a lot about interactivity and freedom in games because I find it such an important aspect of what makes game narratives so interesting. How we, the players, are treated in terms of importance with our decisions and how that can affect how we read the game. And with a game like Godhand, whose theme is presented only by allowing for uninterrupted player freedom, it just makes me think of how sterile game discussion can be. That buzzwords and generic phrases can be inscribed into a game like Gospel, already affecting the perception of the experience. A charitable read of these kind of descriptions would be that games are often too nebulous and abstract and require these terms to rein them in and make them understandable without just actually playing the game. I mean, to an extent, I did just that by talking about the genre of Godhand, which, that's a whole different issue. But to be brutally honest for a second, there's no real way I can fix it globally. I won't be able to change vernacular that has been used for years at this point, all because I don't like the way it comes across. So why not just do it the way I want to do it? Why should I care what the other side is doing? I'll make my terms and I'll stand by them, whether they be overcomplicated, juvenile, or dull. Games are my Godhand, and I have control over how I see them. I don't need to be beholden to others. Let the roulette wheel spin and the tension gauge burst however many times you want, because Gene has to become a god somehow, and only you can do it.
Demon, what am I? It's time for me to choose my path. The power of my Godhand, no evildoer will get past. Hand to hand or fist to fist, kick your nuts or twist your wrist. God power keeps my pimp hand strong, so trust me or you won't last very long. Dragon kick your ass into the Milky Way.